Hello, welcome to this masterclass in modern foreign languages. My name's Alana and I'm a PhD researcher at the University of Manchester. I'm now going to share my screen so you can see our presentation. So today I'm going to talk to you about my research on Reunion Creole, which all started off from studying French at university. So Reunion Creole is a French-based Creole language spoken on Reunion Island, and like many other Creole languages, it has a history of being devalued. So in this talk today, I'm going to show you that Reunion Creole is a language in its own right, which is distinct from French, and talk to you a bit about why it's so important that we increase the status of minority languages like Reunion Creole. So in this short session, our objectives are to understand what a Creole language is. So I'm going to compare Reunion Creole with French in terms of the grammar. Then we're going to think more broadly about what actually constitutes a language. And finally, we'll finish by talking about why it's so important that we research under-resourced languages. Feel free to take notes as we go along in case you want to look into them further. I'll highlight keywords in purple. So let's begin with a bit of background. So Reunion Island, you may not have heard of it. In fact, many people that I speak to haven't. It's an island in the Indian Ocean, just near Madagascar and Mauritius. It's an overseas department of France, which means politically it's part of France. It's just that geographically it's obviously rather distant. So zooming in on Reunion's position in the Indian Ocean, as you can see, it's just near Mauritius and Madagascar and Seychelles. So Reunion was reportedly uninhabited before the French went there in the 1600s. And at that time, they brought over slaves from Madagascar and East and West Africa. Then about a century later, workers from China and India also came over to the island. Now, here are some pictures to show you what it looks like at the moment today. Obviously, it's a very beautiful place. So in terms of the language, obviously, because there were so many speakers from different language backgrounds with different mother tongues, over the generations, the language is sort of, the language that is Reunion Creole today is a product of these languages mixing. However, because French was the dominant language, that of the colonizer, so those people in power, a lot of the vocabulary is derived from French. So the two languages sound quite similar. However, they do have distinct grammars, which we will go on to talk about a bit more. So you may have heard of the term Creole before. So what exactly is a Creole language? You may associate the word Creole with different parts of the world. Now, the definition of a Creole is subject of debate, but most agree that it's a language which is formed through extreme language contact. So similar situations as it's the case in Reunion, with a history of colonization and slavery, where there's lots of populations from different places in the world speaking different languages. Other places that have similar sorts of linguistic contact situations are, for example, the Caribbean. So on this map, you can see that there's lots of different islands on the Caribbean that also have a Creole language. However, each individual setting has its own Creole language and they're different from one another. They've often been grouped together as one though, which has caused debate within the field. So the ongoing questions that are being asked are, is it Is it that they share structures, similarities in terms of their linguistic structure? And if so, why? Or is it just that they've had a similar history and in fact that their linguistic structure is not that similar? So that's why research in this area is necessary. Another point that researchers would raise would be, what does terming these languages Creole languages diminish their status as an independent language? Why are they all grouped as one? Why is, for example, Reunion Creole not referred to as Reunionese, or Haitian Creole as Haitian? Another point to add would be that some of the speakers in these different settings have different names for their own language. So, for example, in Jamaica, the language is known as Jamaican Patois by its speakers. So there are many myths and misconceptions about Creole languages. You may have heard things like, oh, it's just broken French or English or Spanish or whatever other powerful language you want to insert, or it's not a real language, or it's just French, English, Spanish with an accent. Now, these are all wrong. A Creole language is a fully fledged language with a grammar that is distinct from that of its lexifier. So a grammar, when I talk about a grammar, I refer to a set of rules which govern how words, clauses, and sentences can be formed in a natural language. And a lexifier refers to the dominant language in the creolization process. So in Reunion Creole, it's the language French, which is that of the colonizer, whereas in Jamaica, the lexifier is English. So now let's take a look at the difference between French and Reunion Creole. So an example that I'm going to use today is the example of the tense system. So we're only going to have time to sort of briefly touch it. So in French, tense and person are expressed on the verb. So this is known as verbal inflection. So you may be familiar with this sort of table where you have to learn all of the different endings of French verbs. They change according to the person, so I, you, he, she, it, etc. And the tense, so present, future, past. In Reunion Creole, on the other hand, the verb doesn't change according to the person. There are only two forms of the verb, a short form and a long form. But this doesn't reflect which tense they are. So, if we compare the verb manger, there are only two forms in Reunion Creole, mange, the short form, and manger, the long form. But what marks the tense is a pre-verbal marker. So in the future, it's va, in the past perfect is la, and in the imperfect, it's te. So the difference between these two tenses, the past perfect refers to an action which is complete. So I have eaten, or I ate. The imperfect refers to an ongoing action. So I was eating. However, another rule that complicates this is that when the verb has an object, the long form is not used. So the long form switches to the short form. So for example, when the verb eat takes an object such as apple, eat an apple, we see this. So the long form switches to the short form. Mi va manger un pomme. So now I'll show you a comparison of the two. So as we've just seen, they each have their own unique set of rules which determine the forms of the verbs. And you may have also noticed that the personal pronouns are different in the two languages. So personal pronouns are words for I, you, he, she, it, etc. Obviously, tense is just a small part of the whole grammatical system. But as we've seen, they are quite different. But there are several other aspects of the grammar that need to be investigated and that are being investigated in order to show that they are distinct systems. Now, if we think of a language as a set of a code of communication with a set of rules, how do we determine what's a dialect, what's a variety, and what's a language? Well, obviously, things like how distinct the two systems are does play a role, and the distinction is a fuzzy one. But there are several things that come into play. So, obviously, we've got things like politics, power, attitudes, history, and culture. So it's not necessarily how different the two languages are, but it's actually extra-linguistic things. So if we compare the situations of French and Reunion Creole, we'll see, well, French had a colonial empire, so they had influence over the whole world and around different parts of the world, and imposed their language in different parts of the world. So they had a lot of power. Reunion Island, on the other hand, was colonized by France, so less power. The French imposed their education system in many of these settings. So currently the education in Reunion Island is all taught in, the majority of it is taught in French, which again adds prestige to the language. Another thing to consider is that Reunion Creole is primarily an oral language, whereas French has a strong literary tradition. So Reunion Creole stories and stuff would be told orally rather than being written. Another thing related to this point is that there's no established orthography for Reunion Creole. So an orthography is a system of writing the language, a spelling system. And because of this, well, the two are interrelated, the issue of standardization. So standardization is, Reunion Creole is not standardized. There's no sort of set standard of how people should speak in the language, whereas French has a whole institution, the Académie Française, which is dedicated to upholding the French standard. So as you can see, this is what differs between the two languages and why French has been assigned a higher status of prestige as a language, whereas Reunion Creole has a lower status despite being very much a language in its own right with its own grammatical system. So we're coming to the end of the workshop now, so I just wanted to finish by talking about why it's so important to study an under-researched language. So ultimately, it's an issue of equality. Why should some people have access to education in their native language while others don't? Why is it that technologies are always only made compatible in a certain handful of languages of the world? Linguistic equality is an often overlooked area of global inequality. So research on this kind of minority language with a lower status will serve to improve access to inclusive education and technological tools for everyone. Another point to raise would be that it promotes linguistic diversity, which is something that we absolutely must do. So there are over 7,000 languages in the world, and around half of these are not written languages. But what is it that makes us promote or consider written languages with higher prestige? A language, a mother tongue, is something that's absolutely fundamental to a person's identity. So it's really important that we encourage people to learn their mother tongue and to continue speaking it, to preserve their heritage and culture. And finally, researching as many languages as we can helps to improve our understanding of the language faculty, so the human ability to speak language, produce language and speak. So the more we know about what's similar and different between the languages of the world, the more we're able to understand how and why and what's going on when humans produce language, which ultimately is an interesting and important research question. So I hope you've enjoyed the presentation. If you want to know more, then I've just provided some links on further information. So here's a 10-minute talk from a very famous professor of Haitian Creole who's done a lot of work in this area. And that will be the end of the masterclass today. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it.
Hello everyone, I'm here today to give you a quick idea of a day in the life of a modern foreign languages student as part of the Sarin masterclasses. About me, I'm Joe, and I went to Alpha Comprehensive School. It was a decent sized school in Swansea in South Wales. I studied for A-levels, French, History, English Lit and Welsh Bac. I went to many Sarin network events in Swansea, and I'm a second year undergraduate in Clare College in Cambridge University, and I study for a degree modern and medieval languages, French and Ab initio Spanish to be precise. And this year I'm doing the second year of Spanish, so I'm post beginner. And the exam papers which I took last year, just to give you an idea of what a first year was like for me in Cambridge, I took oral exams in French and Spanish and a grammar paper in French, and then I also took a grammar paper in beginner Spanish, and there were translation papers from the foreign language into English, which is good because you get to work with quite a few interesting texts and improve your translation skills. And most kind of languages in Cambridge at least will have oral exams and grammar exams and translation exams in the first year. And then I also sat exams in Spanish literature and French literature, and there was an optional component in that exam for linguistics as well. And in second year, at least in Cambridge, a lot of the information I'm going to be giving here is true from my experience in Cambridge, but maybe true in other places too. In my second year, there's more choice in terms of modules. So I'm still doing compulsory papers such as Spanish grammar, translation from Spanish into English, and Spanish oral exams, but there's considerable choice in terms of papers. You can borrow from other faculties' papers often and try new languages, which is a great part of the degree if you really want to expand your knowledge and try something new. But this year I'm studying Latin American culture and history, which is a literature and film paper, and a literature and history paper called Spanish culture and history, and I'm doing a paper in French linguistics, which is really fun. And that's just to give you an idea of the variety of stuff you can do. What my first year looked like? Well, firstly, in terms of exams, most languages tend to have speaking exams, so where you work for them and you work towards them in supervisions throughout the year. But at least in Cambridge, you go into where the exam is, you get given an article and some time to prepare it, and then you go into the room with the examiners and you'll give a summary of it and discuss it for about 10 minutes. And most languages tend to have some oral component, but it's worth checking. And for other exams, they tend to be in normal times. Traditional timed exams sat in halls, at least for first year, but obviously this year it's looking like there could be alternatives, but that's what the usual norm is for literature, translation and grammar papers. They tend to be traditional timed in-hall exams. And teaching is quite varied. You can have lectures for literature papers, which tend to take place in faculty, or this year they're online. And then you can also have weekly language classes, which contain between 12 and 15 students in Cambridge, and the fortnightly translation classes contain about the same students. So they're smaller than the amount of people in a lecture, but bigger than what supervision would be. And supervisions, which are known as tutorials in Oxford, take place, at least for me they have, for literature and speaking papers. I tend to have oral supervisions once a week for each language, so an hour of French and an hour of Spanish for me. And then for literature, they tend to be fortnightly supervisions, and usually you're supervised with 1 or 2 other people, but there are cases where you can be supervised on your own, but it's more likely you'll be with 1 or 2 other people. And here is an example of an average week which I took from my calendar last year, just to give you an idea of what a first year modern foreign languages timetable may look like. Different languages may have more or less classes depending on what level you're entering in, whether you're entering in beginner or post A level, but I entered in at post A level French and beginner Spanish, so quite a bit of my timetable here is comprised of classwork and reading for essays and writing essays, but it's also really nice because your days are well structured, because you have the classes as well and the supervisions, which punctuates your day quite nicely. And yeah, you can have time off too in your timetable, so it's not constant work. And here's just continued from the week I showed on the previous slide, because I couldn't fit it all on one page. This just gives you an idea of what my afternoons and early evenings looked like last year. So a lot of them is a lot of the time is spent doing classwork, which what I mean by that is grammar exercises, translations, summaries for oral presentations, some reading comprehensions, those sort of things that I would tend to go to the library and do when I had some free time. And planning essays is something I would spend typically midweek doing last year. What I enjoy about studying languages, well, there's loads of things I enjoy. I think it's such a diverse degree. Wherever you go, there's so many different avenues you can explore. But I really enjoy the oral supervision, so the little discussion groups I mentioned earlier with 1 or 2 other students and the supervisor, where you get to discuss a text maybe, or something in the news, or a video maybe about current culture and history, and it's a really good way of just getting good feedback on how you speak in a foreign language and improving, because you're not only trying out new structures, but you're listening to other people and you're getting feedback about your grammar and your vocabulary, and I really enjoy them. Also, a lot of the compulsory papers in the first year give you an idea of what you like and what you don't like for future years when you have more choice. So I liked the first year literature papers in Spanish and French in my case, because it told me what genres of books and films I like, and they were not genres I was exposed to before in secondary school. So it was quite nice to get to find out about new aspects of literature and film, which is fun. I think the best thing about studying languages is learning more about different cultures and histories, and this is a big focus in courses in a lot of unis, and Cambridge definitely it is a focus, because you just get to explore so much interesting pieces of history and culture that maybe you haven't encountered before. And also with modern foreign languages, there's the idea of kind of coming up with expressing your ideas fluently and thinking about stuff in a new light or a different angle, which I think is really interesting, because you're encouraged, especially in Cambridge and in other universities, to question stuff, and to really think about how the language works and how and different countries where that language is popular, how their societies and cultures work. How to do well when studying languages. So number one, organisation. Make a note of all your class times and deadlines. Learn vocab when you can. Participate in grammar and translation classes. Ask questions if you're not sure. It's a really good thing to do. Don't be afraid to ask questions. And try and listen and watch as much as you can in your foreign language. Here are some possible career paths, just to give you an idea of what avenues you can go down. These are taken from the University of Cambridge Modern Languages faculty website, just to give you a rough idea. But there are numerous others. There are loads of possibilities. These don't cover all the possibilities, but they just give you an idea of the broad scope for employment after you finish. And I've put some useful websites here that you can look at in your own time. I especially recommend Inside Uni and the HE Plus website. Thank you all for listening. Best of luck with your applications. Stay safe, everybody. And yeah, thank you.
Nawr cofiwch y bydd y dosbarthiadau meistr na ar gof a chadw I chi eto. Over the last 2 days, you've had the opportunity to attend 4 different masterclasses. But if you wish to see more, the series of masterclass content will be available to you to view after the conference is finished. Gobeithio chi gael rhagflas buddiol am y pynciau amrywiol. The conference has hopefully helped give you a feel for what it might be like to study the different subjects at university level. Amser I fyfyrio eto nawr. It's now time to use the next 15 minutes to reflect on all the masterclasses you've seen over the 2 days and build on the masterclass reflection resources you used yesterday. Os mai heddi chi'n ymuno ni, if you're just joining us today, these will have been sent to you previously or can be downloaded in the lobby area. Ac felly, ewch i'r lobby i'w lawrlwytho. Reflect upon which masterclass you enjoyed most. Beth sy'n mynd a'ch bryd? Which big ideas and research would you like to be a part of investigating when you go to university? Yna, nôl i'r brif stafell I wybod mwy am heno. I'll see you back in the main room at 3:35 for some final instructions before this evening.